Garzon is the president of Revitalize Project. As a speaker and a thought leader, she has delivered inspirational and valuable health, performance, and leadership content to thousands of high performers in the areas of business and sports in over 25 countries. She has presented to executive audiences from 35 of the top Fortune 100 companies as to 12 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Raquel creates and designs customized programs for organizations to meet the unique needs and demands of their clients. Raquel earned her doctorate of health science degree with a concentration in global health from Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Garzon holds a bachelor's in science in nutrition and a master's in the science of nutrition. Dr. Garzon is also a certified ASQ Six Sigma Green Belt, and she's a dietitian as well. I'm bringing Dr. Raquel Garzon to the Zoom space, and she is going to share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda, so much for having me here with you and with all of the participants that are on. I'm so excited to be here to talk about change, making personal change, and actually leveraging a method called the 5 whys that they use in business for making change. And I'm very excited because I'm hoping that you all will be able to participate and interact with me using some of the Zoom tools, which we're going to test out here in a second to see how this goes. So let's go ahead and just get started and see if we can interact a little bit here. So I would actually love for you all to use the Annotate tool. We're going to see how good we are at this. Let's be open-minded and then just see what happens. So if you go to the top of your screen, you're going to see you are viewing Raquel's screen, and you're going to see their view options. And I want you to click on that, and then I want you to find the pencil that says Annotate. And in that Annotate menu, there's going to be a stamp. So I'm going to do it first, and we're going to see how this all works out. We're going to find a stamp, and you can choose a star or a heart. And what we want to do is these right here are common goals for change. And what I want you to do is, if you find your stamp button, is to actually use it to mark any of these that recently have been a change that you have worked on, tried to work on, or would like to work on now. So I'm just wanting to get a sense for some of the goals that you all might have here. Oh, look at you guys finding that stamp tool so quickly. It looks like you've done this before. Awesome. So you can use checks and question marks and X's, and you can change the color, I think, on some of these as well. So, oh my goodness. So it looks like all the goals are goals that you have had recently or have now. And that's great to know, because in order to meet goals, in order to take on a goal, typically we have to make some kind of a change in our lives. And making a change is not easy, and we can get stuck a whole bunch. And so that's what I want to talk about here. How do we understand some of the things that get in the way of making change, and how can we leverage some of the tools to overcome that? So right now, what I want you to keep in mind is one change, because we want to focus on one right now, that you have had trouble with, but you really, really would like to make that change. And I want you to keep that in your mind, because we're going to use that as we go throughout this session. So good job, everybody. Again, if you're having trouble with it, if you're on a tablet or phone, you won't have the stamp, but you can use your drawing tool. So somebody circled Sleep More with their drawing tool. That's perfectly fine. You can also use that as well. Awesome. All right. So now I'm going to clear it so that we can go to the next slide, and we're going to annotate on this slide as well. I want to talk a little bit about what gets in the way of making change. And I call this the knowing doing gap, or the wanting doing gap. There are changes that you know you need to make. Maybe you even know how to do it, or you want to do it, but some of these things get in the way. So what I want you to do is start to look through this list of obstacles and barriers, and I want you to start marking the ones that have gotten in the way of this one change that you are having trouble with. So you'll see stress and emotional coping mechanisms, obstacles with social, events. It could be peer pressure or parties or your own family. constraints with time, resource, or maybe it's expensive, parts of the things that you want to do. You seem to give into temptation. We're going to be talking about temptation and what leads to temptation and what to do about it. Of course, the family, friends, and colleagues. I'm sure it's not your colleagues here, of course, maybe friends that you know or family. And then maybe you find that you really have good intentions, but you just lack that follow through, or your motivation dips at certain times. It's hard to really use that discipline. We got all of them are checked. Organization, preparation, thinking ahead, another tough one. Creating new habits is hard, so we're going to talk about that. And then finding excuses. As human beings, we are really good at making excuses and rationalizing, and we're going to talk about why that is. That's actually completely normal. It's not a weakness. There's nothing wrong with you if you do that. That is a human process. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about here is making sure that you don't feel bad about yourself in terms of having a goal or wanting to make a change and struggling with it, because that's actually human nature. That's completely normal. You're not flawed. You're not lazy. There's nothing that's going on with you. That is a completely normal human response, and it's our brain that actually does this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain, how it works, and how it can work for us or against us when it comes to making change. All right, you guys are super good at this annotation. I love it. I'm going to clear it. Don't be offended. I have to clear it in order to move on. And we're going to keep using this tool. So I want to talk a little bit about the common approaches to making behavior change. And as a trained dietitian, I worked as a dietitian in a clinical setting for many, many years. I'm also a certified personal trainer, so I've worked with people on exercise. And the way that I was trained in nutrition, a lot of it was just telling people what to do. So I was taught, if they're having full fat milk, tell them to have skim milk, and just make substitutions. I don't know if you can relate to that, if you've ever met with someone around making some kind of a behavior change or wellness change. Go for a walk instead of sitting down to watch television. Go eat fruit instead of dessert if you really are craving sweets. That's going to work. Just start working out 2 times a week. Okay, you're not getting enough sleep, just go to bed earlier. When you feel stressed, just breathe deep. Schedule it on your calendar and do it. So those are all reasonable, that's all great advice. But it's not enough. So you know how they say in relationships, sometimes love's just not enough. In this case, when it comes to behavior change, just knowing what to do or having someone tell you to do it typically is not going to be enough, because there's so much that goes on in our brain behind the scenes. And if we don't address what's going on behind the scenes, then you can get all this great advice, but it makes it very difficult to implement. And what we want to do is we want to really get to the root of why is it that you have your old habit? So your old habit is there for a reason. Maybe your old habit was a habit that worked for you. So when you were younger, you could get less sleep. You didn't have to exercise, and maybe you could eat whatever you wanted, and you felt good and you looked good, and you established habits based on that. And now those habits are hard to break. Or maybe that habit is a coping mechanism to deal with other things that are going on in your life. So we want to explore all of the different aspects of making change, so that way you're much more successful with making the change and you don't get frustrated. Okay, so everyone can relate to this, right? You can also do reactions and give me thumbs up and things along those lines. That way I know you're with me and we can relate to these sorts of things. So good advice, but we want to do more. Okay, so next part of this. When we're under pressure, when we have a lot of things going in our lives, and hopefully you guys can relate to this, and feel free if you want to put some check marks on that slide to let me know that you're with me and you agree or whatever that is. But when we have work demands, home demands, we've got stress going on, we've got financial concerns, we've got issues going on maybe with our boss or colleagues, our kids, our parents that might be aging or getting sick. All of these represent demands in our lives. And the more demands that we have putting pressure on us, the more likely we are to fall into old habits. Old habits are it's like our security blanket. It's our comfort zone. When everything else seems to be out of control, we tend to go to old habits only because it's something familiar. And even if those old habits aren't good for us, familiar takes precedence over something that's good for us. So once again, I don't want you to beat yourself up when you fall into an old habit or something that you're familiar with, because that's just human nature. That's how our brain works. It's how it saves energy. So in our brains, that's one of the ways to save energy. Ooh, I've already done this before. Let me just do that. That way I don't have to create a new pathway, a new way of processing, a new way of thinking in my brain because I have too much going on. So this is like a bandwidth issue. And so what we want to do is recognize that we're having a bandwidth issue and address the actual bandwidth issue of all of those pressures, how we respond to those pressures. And when we can do that, it unlocks the ability for the brain then to invest in new habits and new pathways. So thank you once again for participating and marking on the slide. Super fun. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about how the brain works. And hopefully this will be fun for you. It's not super complicated neuroscience, but I think it's the basic of neuroscience that helps us really get ourselves. And I think that's really important as we go through life to understand ourselves more than we understand anybody else. We're going to be with ourselves for the rest of our lives, so we might as well understand how we work. So I've simplified this by showing you that we have inputs coming at us all day long, and it's a lot of input. So we have 9 senses. Most people think about 5 senses. I'm not going to get into all of the different senses right now, but we have our typical 5 senses, which are external senses, and those send signals to our brain, and our brain responds to those senses in a very particular way. So I might hear a sound and process it one way. You might hear the same sound and process it totally differently, especially if you've experienced trauma, if you've experienced things that somehow that sound for you is associated with pain, trauma, hurt. You're going to process that in your brain very differently than somebody else. When it comes to wellness, somebody eating a crunchy potato chip might trigger for you the need to eat. You want food because you've heard this potato chip and this crunching kind of sound. Other people may not respond like that to crunching. And that's just one sense. Our eyes are also very unique. What I see is different than what you see, even if we're looking at the same thing. Some people look at food and they all automatically get really, really hungry. Your sense of smell can be, again, triggering from a positive perspective, triggering from a negative perspective. Tactile and texture, people on the autism spectrum and how they respond to tactile and texture changes how they respond and how they act, and if they're able to make change or not. We have a very important sense called interoception, and interoception is all about internal signals like hunger and satisfaction. And some people's interoceptive signals around how much food it takes to be satisfied is off, and people experience hunger in different ways. So these 9 senses are just very, very influencing and very unique for all of us. And I'm going to show you some examples of things that could potentially trigger a stress response based on some of these inputs that we're experiencing. So once these inputs come into the brain, they go to your emotional center first. I'm going to talk about the emotional center in much more detail, but this is where your brain determines whether there's something to be worried about or stressed about. So this emotional center that you see here, the system is like, are we safe or are we not safe? Are we under threat of some sort that I need to respond to? If there's a threat, what happens is we have less access to our rational brain. So your rational brain is what talks you into things and what talks you out of things. When you don't feel like exercising, you need your rational brain to say, even though you don't feel like it, you really need to go to the gym. You said you were going to do it. You're committed to this. But when we have that emotional part of our brain triggered, that rational brain is not there to counteract what's happening with that emotional brain. So we're going to talk a lot about this processing. And then after the emotion, if we do have a sense of safety and security, then we're able to access the rational brain. But the rational brain doesn't always work in our favor either. So we have to talk about that. And in the end, you get behaviors. So the conclusion that I want you to reach here is that a lot of times when we're wanting to make change, we're wanting to change behaviors. But you can't just change a behavior unless you change something along the way. How I processed my input, what happened to me emotionally, and what's being said in my rational brain. If I don't address these, I'm not going to be able to make that change, that behavior change. I'll change it. I always look at it like an equation. This is 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? 3 is not working out for me. I want it to be 4. But you still have 1 plus 1 plus 1, and it doesn't equal 4. And so at some point you have to change one of these to a 2. And if you don't, you're not going to be able to make sustainable change. So that's what we're going to be talking about here, how the brain works and how you can actually change some of the processing that's going on. So are we good? Give me some check marks here if this makes sense. Yes. All right. Awesome. Very, very good. All right, so we're going to clear this. We're going to go on to the next part, because what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the emotional brain and how the emotional brain works. So once you get these inputs into the system, your emotional brain is going to decide whether you're safe or whether there's a perceived threat. Now, here's the deal. We know right now during the pandemic that people are feeling more stressed. People are having more mental health issues. We know that people are drinking more alcohol. Even though they don't have as much money to spend, alcohol sales are up tremendously. People are putting on weight and eating. We know this from all the memes that are going out there in social media before the pandemic and after the pandemic. And the little kid with her diapers and she's trying to put her jeans on, and it represents basically what happens after the pandemic, and you can't get your jeans on. So we know that there is stuff going on around the emotional part of the brain. And here's why. The emotional part of the brain is very sensitive to what you see here, ambiguity or uncertainty. For survival, our brain has been programmed to take ambiguous or uncertain situations. And because it wants to err on the side of being cautious, it says in any ambiguous or uncertain situation, let's just go ahead and say there's a threat in the environment, just to be safe, just so that we have our bases covered. So now imagine the pandemic. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know week to week whether schools are going to be open, offices are going to be open, what in the world is going on. So every single day, the brain has the potential to be in a perceived threat mode, that fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, it doesn't look like you might picture like an animal, like fighting, or fleeing like a deer might run, or freeze like a possum. It shows up differently in human beings. And this is where I wanted to just kind of point out some of these pictures. So it might show up as just being super anxious and stressed and worried and overwhelmed, which you see this picture of this guy. He could have bouts of kind of yelling or impatience and what is going on and frustration. So, and it could bounce back and forth to just feeling kind of down. Some people, like you see the girl in the red chair, kind of numb out, and their best response is to just put up walls and barriers around them, stop interacting as much, and sort of just go into a shell and protect yourself from not just the environment and the ambiguity, but just from people and all of the things that are going on. And then the guy that I show here on the right, with kind of, it represents that angel and devil on each shoulder. What happens in these situations is that a lot of times the voice that says, just have fun, who cares about the future? There may not even be a future. You might as well just live it up, just do whatever. That voice tends to win in these sorts of situations. So that's what those pictures represent. And every time we're in these ambiguity or uncertainty, what happens is, if you look over here under perceived threat, we create fear and anxiety-based behaviors. And I'm going to show you some of the things of how that actually plays out in our lives. As a survival mechanism, we seek out food. Our brain chemistry actually changes, and it says, go eat, go find sugar, go eat fat. Has anybody experienced that voice in your head during this pandemic? Just eat whatever. Yeah, okay, so sugar, fat, salt, all of those things that help us to survive. There's a hunting instinct that occurs when this emotional processing center has been triggered. So you're gonna want food, you're gonna want that chocolate, you're gonna be looking for the ice cream, you're gonna be looking for the cookies, and you're not gonna be reasonable with it either. That is not how we are programmed. You're gonna really get into it. This state also plays a role in addictive behaviors. I don't mean like addicted to drugs or alcohol or sex or some of those sorts of things, but it could be anything. It could be online shopping. I mean, some people have filled their addiction through online shopping. I don't know if that's happened to any of you, but when the pandemic first started, I was shopping way too much online. It could be video game playing. It could be addiction like getting into TV series and you just can't stop watching and you sit for hours and you just watch these series and you know you should be doing something else. You know you could be exercising, but that is not what your brain is telling you to do. And so that's really important to recognize. Reward seeking, which is temporal discounting, it just means that your system is looking for anything that feels good. What feels good right now? And that can play out in lots of different ways. The other thing that happens, so when we talk about exercise, let me tell you what happens. When your emotional center gets triggered, your body tries to avoid any kind of pain, discomfort, and excessive effort. So that means exercise becomes extra unappealing. So if it was already unappealing before, it becomes even more unappealing. And it's very hard to fight that because your system it's trying to conserve energy. It's trying to protect itself. The last thing it wants to do is go for a run. It just doesn't want to expend that energy. And then you get a lot of survival emotions, frustration, impatience, anger, worry, just feelings of like that pit in your stomach. And so I just wanted to point that out. Again, this is just how our brain is meant to function, okay? And people can overcome it. That's what we're gonna be talking about, but you have to recognize it in order to overcome it. So one of the things that I want you to begin to do once you leave this session is to figure out when you engage in what I'm just gonna call an undesirable behavior, because I don't wanna call it bad, but a behavior that does not align with the goals that you have and the habits that you want to have. So every time that you engage in an undesirable behavior, so you eat something that you really didn't think you should have eaten, maybe you skip exercise, you go to bed too late, you sleep in when you really should have gotten up early, you're procrastinating. So anytime that you recognize an undesirable behavior, I want you to be able to decide whether that undesirable behavior is more due to your emotional side of your brain or the rational side of your brain, because the treatment is different. The intervention for that behavior is different. So I'm giving you here, how do you know if the behavior you engaged in comes from the emotional part of your brain? Here's the big clue. After you do it, at some point, you feel some kind of shame, you feel guilty, you feel disappointed, or you feel some form of regret. You go, oh, man, why did I eat that? Oh, what is wrong with you? Seriously. Or you're like, oh, I can't believe I skipped exercise. Man, now I need to punish myself. Or you're just disappointed and you're like, why do you keep doing this to yourself? Or you're just full of regret. So any time that those feelings show up, it is most likely to be associated with this emotional part of the brain. So now you will have a better idea of how to go about fixing that side, altering it in some way, changing it in some way, so that you don't have the likelihood of falling into these types of behaviors. Okay, so keep that in mind. I put that in big letters so that we wouldn't forget that. So here are some of the triggers that I want you to look at. Any one of these things that you are exposed to in your day can trigger the amygdala and the emotional center to go into the survival mode and create resistance to change. Now imagine having multiple of these throughout the day. It's overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff here. So what I want you to do is I actually want you to annotate. I want you to annotate some of the things that you have felt in the last week that you think have potentially played a role in engaging in undesirable behaviors of some sort. And here I have threatening facial expressions. The amygdala in your emotional part of your brain is super sensitive to dirty looks, or any kind of look where you think somebody doesn't like you. I don't know if you've ever felt that, but you look at somebody and you're like, oh my God, they don't like me. I'm all stressed out. So, and they may not even realize it, but our brain is extremely sensitive to facial expressions. Okay, so we've got a lot covered on the internal signals. Remember, I talked about that interoception. That's all based on interoception. External, excessive change, lots of things going on there. We've got trauma, you know, adverse childhood events. They stay with you, and they really have an influence on how we deal with the things that are going on around us. Okay, so like the other slides, everything has been checked here. And as I mentioned, just one of these, just being tired, will completely derail everything that you have going on. It makes you eat more, store more, burn less food, take away exercise, makes you more emotional, difficulty managing your thoughts. All of that's just lack of sleep. Now you put that and layer it on top of everything else. And then we just say, oh, okay, well, eat better, go exercise. You know, it's not that simple. There are a lot of factors here that are influencing that side of our brain. So I don't have the slide that shows you what do you do about this in terms of how do you counteract this? Well, the way that you counteract it is really by having the opposite of this. Not having a lack of sleep, not letting yourself get too hungry, for example, going too long without eating, dealing with pain, whether that's through mindfulness techniques or other, you know, sorts of methods, regulating your temperature better. Maybe your thyroid is off and you need to, you know, deal with those sorts of things. But you won't be able to control all of these. So what I tell people is you want to control the controllable. What are some of the things that I can deal with? Maybe it is going to therapy and dealing with painful memories and unresolved issues of the past. That has a huge influence on being able to make change, you know, take care of yourself better, exercise, eat better, believe it or not, that makes a huge difference. For the other things that are harder to control, for example, excessive change, we've got all kinds of change going on in our lives. And you can't just say, stop, this change is bad for my brain and it's making me do things I don't want to do. We can't do that. So the other option that we have is to change the way that we look at some of these things. So we train the brain to not get stressed and triggered by some of these things that are uncontrollable around us. And it's not that easy, but there are things that you can do. And Rhonda actually talked about some of those things. So, you know, mindfulness practices can actually make your brain stronger. And those mindfulness practices will make it less likely for you to get triggered. And so I think that that's really important because we want to look at ourselves as a whole, you know, holistic human being. And a lot of the practices that we think of maybe to reduce stress, you know, in the moment, make your brain stronger from a long term. So mindfulness practices make your brain stronger from a long-term perspective, and then you're less likely to get triggered by an ambiguous situation. You're less likely to be triggered by that jerk who is a backstabber and whatever it is, and they've got a negative attitude or whatever that might be, or that stranger who's aggressive and a jerk. You're just much more likely to be zen about those things when you put some of these practices into place. And that's really what that's all about. When you look at, I've worked with a lot of athletes and then also special forces and military. This is what they train for. You know, they train to not get triggered to danger. They train not to get triggered by very specific things because it would derail what they're trying to do from a mission perspective or from a sport perspective. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to give you a few tools here to work on that, but it's really about change what you can and change your response to the things that you can't change, and then work on whatever it is that you can in the meantime. So once again, thank you so much for marking this. It's not meant to make you feel bad or stressed out to see how many of these things could potentially derail you, but it's really to give you power. It's really to help you understand this is what's happening. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not lazy. I don't have this lack of discipline. I have something going on here in my emotional side that I need to deal with so that I can unlock the capability of having these changes occur in my life and creating better habits for myself. That's really what it's about. It's more about awareness. Okay, so now let's talk about the rational side of the brain. If we can get the emotional side of the brain to calm down. So if you were on a previous session that I did that Rhonda invited me to, I did some exercises on calming the amygdala. We did the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. We did some different breathing exercises. We talked about ways of calming the amygdala. So that's also another option. If you do happen to get triggered, there are things that you can do to bring that emotional state down, get grounded, feel calm. And when you're able to do that, you can then access the rational brain. And the rational brain is great because it has what we call all of our best thinking. It overrides short term and thinks more about long term. It says, yeah, this would feel good right now, but it could potentially compromise our long-term goals and our values and our purpose. So why don't we just go ahead and not do that? So we want that rational brain to kick in as much as possible. It's responsible for insight. So, if I do this, that's really not going to be the best thing for me. And, maybe it connects the dots. Emotional regulation, that rational brain can go through mindfulness practices. This is one of the best ways to do it. Through mindfulness practices, the rational brain can go and help you to regulate the emotional part of your brain. Response choice, which means I can work out, I can skip the workout, I can do a really good workout, I can kind of do a half workout that's not really effective. This part of your brain makes that choice. What am I going to choose in this moment? It is responsible for self-control and self-regulation. We need to use self-control and self-regulation, especially in those moments in which we're trying to create new habits and counteract that old habits that have already been established in the brain. Like I said, there's these shortcuts in your brain and it says, well, I've done this before. It doesn't matter if it's not good for me. I'm super familiar with it. I'm really good at it and it's easy and I don't have to use as much brain power. You need self-control and self-regulation to do the opposite, which is go maybe in this direction. It's a skinny little line because it hasn't been used a lot. And this is where self-control and self-regulation comes into play, and willpower as well. And it's also the planning and preparation. Planning and preparation makes a huge difference. You all know that probably from a work perspective, and the same thing when it comes to behavior change. So let me tell you the negative side of the rational brain. We do have functional thoughts. So this is our best thinking. This is great. This is what we should do. However, we do also have some dysfunctional aspects. We have formulated identity, beliefs, attitudes, all kinds of thoughts in our head that don't always necessarily work for us. They are there sometimes to protect us from being hurt. They are there to maybe help us use experiences in the past and apply them to now, but maybe we've applied them in a way that is no longer working for us. So there are some dysfunctional aspects that I'm going to point out. We also have our inner voice and our inner thoughts, and they are very, very influential. And some of us talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to anybody else that we cared about or loved. And that's also something to consider. If you're overly critical with your voice, if you beat yourself up, that's going to be a real issue. If you're like, you suck, you always fail, you said you were going to do this and you never follow through, that's not really a way to motivate yourself. I have never heard of motivating employees really from a sustainable or long-term perspective by telling them how much they suck and how much they shouldn't be there and why do they even try. That's just not okay. And that's not probably the way that we want to talk to our kids to get them to develop any form of self-confidence and capabilities by telling them how crappy they are. But somehow we give ourselves permission to talk to ourselves that way. And that might be one of the things that needs to be addressed. There's also an inner voice that is extremely permissive. And that means that you let yourself off the hook too much. So this is where we would, maybe for a kid, we would say that they're spoiled, right? And so this might be, oh, it's okay. You don't have to exercise today. You had a really hard day and it was super stressful and nobody understood you. And you deserve to just sit here with your bottle of wine and your TV and put your feet up because nobody else is going to do this for you. You just need to do this yourself. So we also have an overly permissive side of our voice, or these thoughts that we may not say this out loud because nobody would say this out loud, but we might have those thoughts. Oh, someone else is paying and you're never going to be here again, and you're in a different zip code and you're never going to come to this restaurant again. So just go ahead and go all out. It's just a one-time thing. It's just one time. And so what happens is we've got this very permissive voice. And if that permissive voice takes over, that's also going to be a problem. So we have to find a balance between the overly critical and that overly permissive voice, just like we do with kids. We call it tough love. I love you, but I have to be tough with you sometimes in order to get you to really learn and understand and take responsibility and things along those lines. And we have a little bit more trouble doing that for ourselves than we do for other people. Mindset is about beliefs and attitudes. So if you hold on to the belief that you need to clean your plate because there are kids starving in other countries, it's going to be really hard to make nutrition changes. If you believe that you are uncoordinated and unathletic and there's just nothing about you that should be moving or exercising or doing any kind of sport, it's going to be really hard to implement a change around exercise. If your attitude is, I'll sleep when I die, right now, this is for living. I feel fine on 4 hours of sleep. If that's your attitude, it's going to be really hard to try to get more sleep if that's, one of your goals, or you need to get more sleep in order to help you with a condition or a disease of some sort. So those are just things to think about, and the root cause and the 5 whys and some of what we're going to be doing can help you to uncover some of the inner voices, the beliefs and the attitudes, some of the dysfunctional aspects of our thinking. And it can also help you plug into all of the functional aspects, the purpose of your life, the values that are important to you. The other thing about the rational brain that I want to talk about in a little bit more detail is something called cognitive dissonance. These are excuses, but they're fancy excuses. So let me show you what those look like, and then you can decide if this is something that has happened to you, and you can actually annotate if you think that any of these apply to you. So what happens is that, let's say that we engage in an undesirable behavior of some sort, or even before we engage in it, what we do, if we're using the rational brain, is we might say, oh, it totally wasn't my fault. My kids are the ones who had that cereal and those cookies and those donuts in the house. And it totally wasn't my fault because at work, they brought all of this crap to eat. And it just would have looked bad if I didn't eat the stuff. It just would have been so offensive. And so we tend to avoid responsibility for what we do or what we don't do. So if we didn't have a chance to work out, we basically, work asked me to do all of this stuff, and then they threw more emails at me, and then my kids did this, and I wanted to exercise, believe me, but everybody else got in the way of me doing that. It's not my fault. So that might be a technique that we might use. Denial, just complete denial or distortion. I didn't eat that. There were studies that were done that they filmed people eating certain things, and then they would ask them, well, how many pieces of bread did you eat? Well, I didn't eat any bread. What are you talking about? And I don't know if it's because they don't remember because they were eating mindlessly, because it was on the Brian Wansing's book. It's super interesting, which is mindless eating, or I think it's mindless eating is the book. But they literally would say, I did not eat any bread. And they're like, here you are. We filmed you eating bread. And they're like, what? How is that possible? So we might deny, or we might distort. Oh, it really wasn't that much pasta. Or, I did work out really, really hard. And meanwhile, you were on your phone and watching a TV show and flipping through a magazine. So we sort of distort the reality to make it suit kind of our story and our narrative that we want it to fit. We minimize. So minimize might be, oh, you think I drink a lot? Well, you should see this guy. You should see her. Oh my God, she is so much worse than me. So we tend to minimize what we're doing by comparing ourselves to somebody who might do it worse. Choosing information. I love this one. This is Well, I heard wine was good for you. I'm just making sure I get plenty of it by drinking extra. And then dark chocolate. Did you see the study on dark chocolate? I'm just making sure I have my dark chocolate covered. Oh, and then I read that soda is just as hydrating as water. And so what we do is we look at that little piece of information that justifies what we're doing, and we want to ignore the rest of the information. We just don't want to deal with it. And then rationalize is all about where we say things like, well, I have good genetics, my parents smoked, ate like crap, never worked out, and they're still alive and they're in their 90s. I still feel okay. There's nothing wrong with me yet. So I think it's working. You only live once. I could be hit by a bus tomorrow. Might as well enjoy life. So those are all examples of this type of behavior. So what I want you to do is I just want you to mark some of the things that you think you might use on a regular basis. That's here with the stamp. And we tend to have our go. Somebody circled all of them. I love you, man. Thanks. But we definitely tend to have our go-tos that we're really, really good at. And sometimes I meet with a client and I talk with them, and in a 30-minute time frame, they will have used all 5 of these. It's kind of like a bingo where I'm like, all right, let's see what you're going to use on this one. And the reason that I want you to consider this is because if you can catch yourself and actually acknowledge, you know what, right now I'm avoiding responsibility, or right now I'm minimizing, or I'm rationalizing right now. You are your own best therapist or counselor when it comes to stuff like this. If you can pick up not just what you say out loud, but even if you're just thinking it, if you are thinking it, and you can catch yourself, you can immediately call yourself out and make a change. And I think that's really good to be able to do that, because if we're waiting for someone else to call us out, they're not in our heads. And I would say at least 75% of this stuff is going on here and it never leaves our mouth. And so if we're counting on someone else to call us out, we just miss a lot of opportunities to really change our voice and what's going on in our head and how we deal with change, our behaviors, our own way of processing, our own way of thinking. So thank you guys for marking that. Here's what I want you to look at. So remember when I talked about the emotional side, and if you made an emotional decision, you felt guilt or disappointment or regret or shame later. If you've made the undesirable behavior choice with your rational brain, it is going to be associated more with feeling justified or like optionless, like I really had no choice, or doing the best you can. So there's really not that kind of negative regret, like what's wrong with me? It's more like, well, of course I can't work out because I have a job, I take care of my kids, I've got all of these things to do, nobody helps me out, nobody understands, I don't have the luxury of doing those sorts of things. So that's more of what that rational brain will sound like. It will find those justifications and it will make you feel like this is the best I can do in this situation. So that's just a good way to kind of go through your day and say, okay, I did this. Do I feel bad about it or not? If I don't feel bad about it, then there might be something to address on that rational side of my brain. And you can address it. Again, there are treatments, interventions, and things that you can do for all of these sorts of things. So I have some fun things that I do here in the rational brain where you put your thoughts on trial, where you really challenge some of those beliefs or attitudes. But in order to do that, you have to really dig down to that root cause of what is really contributing to this. And that's why we're going to talk about the 5 whys and getting down to that root cause. So this will be extremely helpful to you if you're able to implement it. Okay, so let's go to the 5 whys and the root cause analysis. So getting to the root cause, this is so important, and businesses really put a lot of effort. So that 6 Sigma Green Belt certification, it's not in martial arts, it's in business, and it's around quality and quality control, making change, addressing business problems. And it's a certification that helps you basically solve business issues and problems, whether it's efficiency, effectiveness, errors, things along those lines. And one of the tools that they use in 6 Sigma, and they use it in business, is a root cause analysis. And the reason a root cause analysis is so important is because on the surface, you might think that a very specific problem is due to something, and then you might try to fix that problem when that wasn't really the problem. And I use the Jefferson Memorial as an example about this. So the Jefferson Memorial was at one point deteriorating very rapidly, and it was deteriorating so rapidly that it was becoming hazardous, and they were going to have to spend a ton of money repairing it. But then they thought, man, if we have to keep doing this, this is going to be super, super expensive. And so what they did is they applied the 5 whys. And at first, they thought it was due to acid rain and all of these different things that were not controllable, and that really it was just going to cost them a ton of money to keep redoing the Jefferson Memorial. And when they did the 5 whys, so basically what you do is you keep asking why, and it's not, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But the first one was, okay, so why is the Jefferson Memorial deteriorating so rapidly compared to other monuments and becoming so hazardous? So other monuments weren't doing this. So they asked why, and they said, well, we're having to clean this memorial 2 times a week, and we're having to use these really harsh chemicals to clean it because it's so dirty. And then the airport's not that far away, and those chemicals are mixing with the exhaust from the jet fuel. Okay, well, why are you having to clean it so much compared to other monuments? And why are you having to use such strong chemicals? Well, there's lots of pigeons on this monument as compared to the other monument. And there's lots of bird droppings, and it's just, they're hard to get out. Okay, well, why are there so many pigeons on this memorial compared to the other memorial? Why? Because there are a ton of spiders that are here. This is like, the domino effect. It reminds me of childhood books. Well, there's all of these spiders here. We have way more spiders on this memorial as compared to the other monuments that we have here. Well, why are there so many spiders? Well, there are these small little midges, these insects that are drawn to this memorial at dusk. They don't go to the other memorials. They like this one. Well, why are they drawn to this particular memorial? Well, the way that we've illuminated this memorial with these floodlights, they're attracted to those floodlights at dusk. And we don't have this with the other memorial. And so what they were able to see is that it was really the lighting that was the issue. It wasn't the rain, and it wasn't some of these other factors. And by changing the lighting and how they illuminated the Jefferson Memorial, they were able to actually slow deterioration, prevent all of the hazardous things that were happening. And it cost them a lot less money in the long run because they wouldn't have to be doing all of those repairs. But if they hadn't done the whys to really get to that root cause, they would have just kept repairing, pumping money into it, and assuming it was something more external, like rain or other things that were going on. So when you use the 5 whys, what you will see is that you can use them really for anything in your life. So I'm going to give you an example here of using the 5 whys. Oh, and I put this here, the 5 whys. It's never because of a lack of time, and it's not because you're lazy. So as I do work with people, and when I work with them and I say, okay, why aren't you working out or exercising like you said you were going to do? And because I'm lazy. And these are people that, they work, they have families. I'm sure all of you do amazing things in your life, and you balance so much between work and family and friends. And I'm sure that you do things for the community, and you're kind and you're caring, and you give so much to other people. You are not lazy. The fact that you are here on this call tells me that you're not lazy. And if we always just say we're lazy and we begin to believe that, we live a life. We can let ourselves kind of off the hook and say, well, I'm lazy, but you're not. And so if we can peel back those layers and say, what's really preventing you from exercising, it unlocks more possibilities, because we're going to stumble upon a real reason. You're not lazy, and so there's nothing to fix. And so that's what I always say. So it could be, why aren't you getting exercise done? Well, I work, I have kids, it's really hard to balance everything. Well, can you get up a little bit earlier to do exercise, 30 minutes earlier? Why can't you do that? Well, because what happens is that I go to bed too late. Okay, well, why do you go to bed too late? Well, because I got dinner, and then I have to clean up, and then there's homework with the kids, and then we've got all of the bedtime routines, and then just all that stuff. Well, what's that other stuff? Tell me more about that. Well, because after the kids go to bed, I just feel like I need time to myself. And so I relax and maybe I watch some TV and you get on social media. And okay, well, why can't you, instead of watching TV or getting on social media, just do a little bit of exercise? Because that requires effort, and social media on my TV is just way more fun. So the truth is that at that point, it's just, you don't want to put the effort at that time. The social media requires less effort. You like the series, it's more fun. At that moment, your priority is to relax and watch TV over getting exercise. And when you can realize that, then you can say, okay, does that then align with my long-term goals? In 10 years, if I keep doing this, getting my TV fill, is that going to take precedence over if I had taken 15 minutes out of that chunk of time and gotten some exercise? What's going to be more connected to my purpose? What's going to be more connected to my values? And when you have to say, I don't exercise because I don't prioritize it, or, I just prefer to do other things, it's a lot harder than just saying, because I don't have time. Time is just an easy cop out for people because it's so socially accepted. I don't have time. I don't have time. Everybody has the same amount of time. But what I want to know is why you're choosing to use your time on the things that you're using it on. Why is this more important than that? And that's what you really want to get down to. And it's not to make you feel guilty or bad, because that's not my role for people. My role isn't to tell them what to do. It's for you to self-discover, what it is that you want to be investing in and what matters to you. So, there's so many examples of how you can take something that's negative and keep asking yourself the whys. And it doesn't have to just be why. It could be why not? Why not get up earlier? Why not take 15 minutes out of this time and do exercise instead? But you can also use it from a positive perspective. So for example, for eating better, somebody might say, well, my goal is to eat better. Okay, well, why do you want to eat better? Well, I just think it would just be good for me and maybe it would help me to lose weight. Well, why do you want to lose weight? Well, I think that it would make me feel better about myself. I would look better and it would give me a little bit more confidence. Well, why would having more confidence be important to you? Well, I think if I had more confidence, I would take more risks. I would maybe stand up for myself a little bit more. I would be more expressive with myself. And why is that important to you? Well, because I feel in certain aspects of my life, people take advantage of me. And maybe I could advance my career a little bit more if I spoke up or expressed myself or felt a little bit more confident. And why is that important to you? Well, because my self-worth and my self-respect and my career, all of those are important to my purpose and my values and who it is that I want to be. So now all of a sudden you've gone from just eating better, which is so surfacey and so blah. I mean, everybody says that, right? To wanting it to be an expression of who you are and your respect and your career and who it is that you want to be as a person. And when you can take something like eating better and relate it to something as deep and critical and important as who you are and your purpose and values, it takes on a whole new meaning. And now that rational brain keeps that in mind. And every time you're tempted to eat a certain thing, it says, remember that what this is all for. It's about your purpose. It's about your values. It's about taking risks and being confident and expressing yourself. It's not just about a salad versus a dessert anymore. And when you can take things to a much deeper level that really hits, man, you can unlock all kinds of possibilities in your life. So why or why not is going to be important from addressing a bad behavior and just undesirable behavior, something that you're doing or not doing. But it can also be a way to anchor yourself into motivating yourself to do something. Why do you want to be more patient? Because I keep losing my patience with my child as they're studying at home on Zoom. I feel like I'm going through the 7th grade again, and I've had to work on my patience. And so why is that important to you to be patient when you're doing homework with your child? Well, I find myself being critical, and I can see that he's starting to feel that, and he gets frustrated and emotional. And why is it important for you to not have that happen? Well, I really want to cultivate a very positive relationship with my child. I want to role model what leadership looks like to him. I want him to learn how to deal with difficulty in a positive and constructive way. And why is that important to you? Because being a parent and mentoring my child and giving him the tools that he needs to succeed is really important to me. So now it's not just about take 5 deep breaths and be patient. It's tied to an identity that you have and something that really, really matters to you. So, and also I just wanted to say 5 is not a magic number. They just say the 5 whys, but they use as many whys or as little whys and why not as possible. It's really about digging deeper. So here's what I want to leave you with today. I want you to take a look at this change that you've been working on, that maybe you've struggled with. And I want you to begin to ask yourself the whys and the why nots for the reasons that you do or don't do certain things, and to be really honest with yourself. If you are minimizing, if you are rationalizing, to remember that that's human nature. And the most important part of that is self-discovery. And when you can self-discover it, then you can address it. And when you can get down to that nugget of whatever it is that it might be, you might be scared. You might discover that the root cause is that you're afraid of change and what that implies for you. And that when things change, you feel like you have less control. And sometimes we hang on to the old because it's familiar, because we're scared of the unfamiliar. And if you can discover that about yourself, it allows you to address that specifically instead of torturing yourself with everyday behaviors when that's not the issue. The issue is that you need to address that root cause first. And so I love this quote. A man always has 2 reasons for doing anything, a good reason and the real reason. And I love that quote because typically that's what I find with people that I work with. I would say the first 5 reasons that you give me for doing or not doing something are never it. It's never it. You got to keep digging. And when you do it, not only will you discover the root issue getting in the way of this change, what you will find is something that probably is getting in the way of other areas of your life. And in fixing one thing and addressing one thing, you're actually able to flourish in many other areas of your life. So I just want to thank you and thank Rhonda for having me here today. I just wanted to plug my book because the 5 whys is one of the chapters of getting to the root cause. It's chapter 7 in my book, The Business of You, Leveraging Business Principles to Thrive in Life. And if you'd like to follow me, Revitalize Project is on social media. And if you want to have a professional connection with me, I'm also on LinkedIn and would love to hear from you. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Dr. Garzon. Let's give her a hand. Fascinating information. I think somebody else said that in the chat. Are there any questions that you would like to pose, Dr. Garzon, while we have her in the space? Lots of good information. I especially like the information about how you talk to yourself. You know how often women will get up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, oh, look at your hair. Oh, look at your butt. You know, that stuff means a lot to your brain. From what I hear, Dr. Garzon, is that true?
Absolutely. How you talk to yourself completely sets the tone for your whole day, for how you view yourself, how you interact with others, and how you choose to take care of yourself. So talk to yourself the way that you would talk to someone that you loved and cared about, always.
Absolutely. You know, and we have a space full of education employees. So I'll take it even further and say, talk to yourself like you would talk to a 5-year-old.
Yes.
And then when they go to school, notice how they perform. So you want to talk to yourself like you would talk to a child going to school and setting up their performance for the day. Appreciate you so much. Definitely will be calling on you again in the future, our next conference. If there's no questions, lots of compliments in the chat. I am going to say, let's take a break. Dr. Seward is in the room. It is 10:59. Let's say a 5-minute break. 10 minutes is what I hear my team saying, a 10-minute break, okay? Because this is important. And Dr. Seward is probably going to mention how the lights in this digital environment we are in is affecting how we operate during the day as well as how it affects us at night. So I'm setting a pattern for you right now for your day, especially if you're sitting in front of a screen, you need to take breaks. So we're going to take a break. Go refresh your water, put a little more lemon in it, maybe even a cucumber this time. Stay hydrated, okay? And we'll bring things right back at you, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Bye.